Now here we're looking at a centralized wireless LAN controller deployment. And in a centralized implementation, the mobility components are the mobility agent and the mobility controller are both on the wireless LAN controller, right? So we have the mobility agent and the mobility controller, which you've learned about, hopefully learned about in previous lessons. But I want you to do me a favor. I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and I want you to get a sheet of paper out. I want you to pause the video after I ask the question. Answer the question on a piece of paper, and then we can check your answers. It's kind of like a live oral quiz. Let's put it that way. So what we are going to start with, let's start with the mobility agent. Okay? What does the mobility agent do? Okay, we're going to talk about the configuration and everything like that. But we need a mobility agent within our centralized wireless LAN controller deployment. And this is one of the things you have to understand. One of the first things we talked about in this lesson. So let's see where you are here. What is one of the first things it does? I want you to go ahead and pause your camera. We're going to go through all three of these, but I want you to go ahead and pause the video right now as you write down these three answers for what the mobility agent does. And when we come back from that little pause, I'll give you the answer. All right, so hopefully you had enough time to write everything down. So here we go. What is the mobility agent responsible for in our centralized environment? Well, first off, we're going to talk about, we're going to terminate AP cap-WAP tunnels. That's what the mobility agent is responsible for. AP cap-WAP termination. Now, what else is the MA or mobility agent responsible for? Well, it's also responsible for maintaining the client database. Hopefully you had that listed down on your sheet. And then now time for the last answer. The last answer here for mobility agent is policy enforcement. Now, this is one of the first things we talked about in this lesson, so hopefully you got all of these three correct. Because guess what? Now I'm going to ask you to do the same for the mobility controller. What does the mobility controller do? Go ahead and pause the video right here. Take some time to write out your answer. And then when you're ready, you have your answer written down, unpause the video, and I will have your answers for you. All right. What is the mobility controller useful for? It is for client mobility. It actually moves the client around between controllers. What else do we use? The RRM, radio resource management, is also controlled by the mobility controller. Our IDS and spectrum management is also controlled by the mobility controller. So hopefully you did really well with this first part of this quiz. You got all the answers correct. All right, for our next exercise, we're going to be talking about how do we configure a wired and wireless network without the console cable. So how are we going to actually access our 2504, our model 2504, and actually make a connection using a client that's wired or wireless in our environment? So we'll start with the wired side first. How are we going to make these changes? How are we going to connect to this wireless LAN controller and make these changes to our environment? Now, first off, what you're going to have to do is pause your video and write down your answers. We'll start with the wired side, okay? We'll focus on the wired side first. So how would you connect to this wireless LAN controller and make your configuration changes? Go ahead and pause the camera now. I want you to write down the steps for me, and then unpause when you're ready for the answers. And we can compare how you did versus how what we actually want you to do. All right, hopefully you had enough time to put in your answers. And let's discuss this wireless LAN controller and how we would configure it through a wired client, how we would do this with a wired client. First up, we have to make sure that our system LED light should be solid. Before we do anything, we want to make sure that the wireless LAN controller is completely booted up, all its systems are running. So hopefully you have that as step one. You power on the wireless LAN controller, you wait for that LED system light to be completely solid. Now, next up, what are we going to do? Next up, we're going to connect our port to any port on the wireless LAN controller. Any port at all on the wireless LAN controller. And what that does is that connects up to our wireless LAN controller. The ports are enabled during startup with a DHCP server that's going to provide an IP address within the 192.168.10 subnet. Now, there are auto sensing ports on here. There's no use for a crossover table or anything like that. But once booted, we need to go to the address of 192.168.11 in our browser for our GUI wizard configuration. That's all we need to do for our wired setup. Now, remember, this is only if the wireless LAN controller hasn't had any type of configuration done on it before. This is right out of the box. If we need to do a configuration, don't have a console cable, this is what we need to do. Now, what about the wireless side? Is there a different step for the wireless side configuration? I want you to go ahead and write down on your piece of paper how you would do this with a wireless client. What's required? What are we going to do? What are the steps? Go ahead and pause your video right now. Write down your answers. Unpause when you're ready. All right, hopefully you had enough time to go through this. Let's start with the first step. Our first step is this. If we are doing for a wireless setup, we have to wait for the AP to power and broadcast an SSID. So we're going to need an AP. We're going to need to plug it in. Now, if we don't have an external power source, we're going to need to use port 3 or port 4 if power over Ethernet is needed for this initial configuration of the wireless LAN controller. Now, what's next? We have this wireless LAN controller and we have an AP attached to it. Does that mean we're completely set up? I can just click with open authentication to this client. No, it doesn't. It actually doesn't. We have to connect to the AP wireless LAN controller using a password. That's right. It's going to be Cisco AirNet Provision is the SSID, and we're going to use the password key of password in order to connect to this AP. This will allow us to connect to and receive an IP address from that DHCP server, same as the wired side, the 192.168.10 subnet, and then we're going to go to our browser and we're going to put in 192.168.11. This will bring up the GUI configuration wizard that'll allow us to do our configuration to our wireless LAN controller for deployment. So that's how we would do this for our wired side and our wireless side.